They told him the hospital didn't treat animals. They told the nurse to step away. They told the wounded dog he didn't belong there. But none of them asked why a Navy SEAL would refuse to leave in the middle of a snowstorm. None of them asked why the dog wouldn't let anyone near him. And no one asked what kind of pain teaches loyalty this deep. Because this wasn't just a wounded K9, this dog had saved lives the mountain tried to erase. And the man beside him had been ordered to forget it ever happened. While rules took control inside the hospital, something else was already moving outside. Not sirens, not noise, just quiet footsteps getting closer. Sometimes God doesn't arrive with thunder. Sometimes he arrives with a test of compassion. And the question is never who deserves help, it's who is willing to give it when it costs everything. Snow erased Cedar Ridge one layer at a time. It swallowed the edges of the highway first, then the reflective paint, then the sense of distance itself, until the road became nothing more than a narrow tunnel carved by headlights and stubborn momentum. Cedar Ridge was a mountain town in northern Colorado, built decades earlier for logging crews who no longer came, sustained now by locals who had learned to live with isolation and winters that did not forgive mistakes. On nights like this, when the wind came hard down the slopes and the snow fell sideways, the town felt less like a destination and more like a last line before nothing. Ethan Cross drove through the storm without hesitation, both hands firm on the wheel, shoulders squared despite the ache that lived permanently beneath his jacket. He was 43, tall and solid without excess, his body shaped by endurance rather than strength alone. His hair was cut short in a military style he had never bothered to change, dark brown threaded with early gray at the temples. His face carried the quiet wear of long service, a thin scar along his jaw, lines at the corners of his eyes that came not from smiling, but from watching. He wore a U.S. Army OCP camouflage jacket, issued and reissued over the years, the fabric faded but intact, name tape stitched cleanly on the chest, U.S. Army opposite it, rank centered and plain. It was not a uniform he wore for recognition. It was simply what he had always worn when things mattered. On the passenger side, Coda lay rigid against the seat, his large German shepherd frame tense with restraint. He was 8 years old, heavy-boned and broad-chested, his black and tan coat thick enough to resist the cold but dulled slightly by age. One ear remained upright, alert even now, while the other drooped unevenly, responding slower as pain crept through his body. His breathing was controlled, disciplined, but his rear leg was tucked in tight, refusing weight. Coda did not whine. He never had. His dark eyes followed Ethan constantly, searching his face for instruction, trusting him completely, despite the sharp pulses of pain that tightened his muscles. The hospital appeared suddenly through the snow, its emergency entrance glowing yellow beneath a metal awning crusted with ice. Ethan pulled into the covered bay and cut the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved. The wind rattled the structure overhead, sending fine snow spiraling across the concrete. Coda shifted, attempted to stand, failed, and settled back with a low sound that stopped short of a growl. Ethan was out of the truck immediately, boots crunching against packed snow as he moved around to the passenger side. He opened the door slowly, voice low and even. "Easy, I've got you." Coda leaned forward but did not try to exit. His eyes flicked toward the glass doors, then back to Ethan, uncertainty tightening his jaw. Ethan crouched beside him, one gloved hand resting lightly against the dog's chest, feeling the controlled rise and fall beneath thick fur. He did not rush. He never did. Inside the emergency department, the night shift was thin. A triage nurse looked up first, her expression shifting from routine fatigue to confusion as she took in the sight outside. She was in her early 30s, slender, hair pulled into a tight bun, her posture already guarded as she pushed back from the desk. Behind her, a security guard straightened, hand drifting instinctively toward his radio. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, letting in cold air and the shape of a man in camouflage beside a dog that did not move. Ethan stepped inside just enough to be seen, keeping himself between Coda and the room. "My dog is injured," he said calmly. His voice carried no urgency, no request. "He can't walk." The nurse hesitated. "Sir, we don't treat animals here." Her eyes flicked toward the dog, then quickly away. "You'll need to contact a veterinarian." "There isn't one," Ethan replied. "Not tonight." The security guard took a step closer. Coda's head lifted instantly, ears shifting forward, body tightening. His lips did not curl, but his posture changed, positioning himself instinctively between Ethan and the approaching figure. The guard stopped short, reading the warning correctly. "We can't have an animal in the ER," the nurse said, more firmly now. "It's a safety issue." Ethan did not move. "He won't hurt anyone." Coda's gaze never left the guard, tracking every breath, every shift of weight. His injured leg trembled as he adjusted his stance, nails clicking sharply against the tile floor. The sound echoed louder than it should have in the quiet department. A second nurse appeared from a hallway, older, broader in build, her expression tight with concern. "What's going on?" "He brought a dog," the first nurse said. "It's injured." The older nurse looked at Coda more carefully, noting the tucked leg, the controlled breathing, the way the dog leaned subtly toward the man beside him. "Sir," she said cautiously, "we really can't—" "I'm not asking you to treat him," Ethan interrupted. "I'm asking you not to make me take him back into the storm." That gave them pause. The wind howled outside, rattling the glass doors. Snow streaked sideways under the lights. For a moment, no one spoke. A man in a white coat emerged from a nearby office, his movements precise, his expression already hardened by irritation. He was in his late 50s, tall and narrow-shouldered, his gray hair neatly combed, glasses perched low on his nose. Dr. Harold Whitman had the posture of someone accustomed to authority and the temperament of someone who believed deeply in rules. He took in the scene in a single glance. "This is a civilian hospital," he said evenly. "We don't admit animals, especially not aggressive ones." Coda's ears pinned back slightly at the tone, his body lowering, muscles coiled. Ethan felt the shift immediately, his hand tightening just enough against the dog's chest to steady him. "He's injured," Ethan said. "He needs to stay out of the cold." "Doctor," Whitman folded his arms. "If that animal bites someone, we're liable. You need to remove it from the building." The word animal hung in the air like a line drawn deliberately. Coda adjusted his stance again, placing himself more firmly between Ethan and the doctor, his injured leg dragging slightly as he repositioned. It was not defiance. It was duty. Ethan met the doctor's gaze. His expression never changed. "He's not going anywhere." The security guard shifted uneasily, glancing between the dog and the doctor. The nurses hovered at a cautious distance, caught between concern and protocol. Outside, the storm continued to roar, indifferent to their hesitation. Coda's eyes remained fixed on the room, alert, assessing, refusing to allow anyone closer. Ethan stood beside him, unmoving, a quiet line drawn just as firmly as the one the doctor had laid down. And in that narrow space between hospital lights and mountain storm, nothing moved forward, and nothing moved back. Madeline Brooks noticed the change before anyone else did, not in the dog, but in the room. She was 29, medium height, slender without fragility, her movements economical in the way of someone who had learned to conserve energy during long shifts. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back into a practical knot that never loosened, and there was a faint crease between her brows that suggested she spent more time thinking than speaking. Madeline had a calm face, the kind that patients looked at twice because it didn't promise miracles, only attention. She had once planned to join a military medical program, but a family emergency years ago had anchored her to civilian hospitals instead, shaping her into someone who trusted judgment over instructions and learned to carry regret quietly. She stood a few steps back from the others, not crowding the entrance, watching the way the German shepherd held himself. Coda's posture was rigid, but not wild. His teeth were not bared. His growl, when it came, was low and controlled, more warning than threat. Madeline's eyes tracked details others missed. The uneven distribution of weight, the shallow pause between breaths, the way the dog's focus never left the man beside him. This was not aggression. It was vigilance sharpened by pain. The security guard shifted again, uncertainty creeping into his stance, and Coda responded instantly, shoulders tightening, injured leg dragging as he repositioned himself closer to Ethan Cross. Madeline saw the wince the dog tried to hide. Pain flickered across his body like static, brief but undeniable. "Wait," she said, her voice quiet but steady. It wasn't a command. It was a pause. Dr. Whitman turned his head slightly, irritation already set into the lines around his mouth. "This isn't your call," he replied, clipped and dismissive, eyes never leaving Ethan. Madeline didn't argue. She stepped to the side instead, lowering herself just enough to bring her closer to the dog's eyeline without crouching fully. She kept her hands visible, palms open, her body angled away rather than squared. Years in emergency care had taught her that how you approached mattered as much as why. "Hey," she said softly, directing the word not at the man, not at the room, but at Coda. Her tone was even, unhurried, threaded beneath the hum of fluorescent lights and distant monitors. "You're doing fine." Coda snapped his head toward her, ears flicking forward, muscles tightening. His eyes locked onto hers for a fraction of a second, assessing. Madeline didn't flinch. She didn't stare him down either. Her gaze softened, dropping just enough to avoid challenge while staying present. Ethan felt the shift immediately. The tension in the dog's chest eased a fraction beneath his hand. He glanced sideways at Madeline, measuring her the way he measured terrain and people alike. She met his look briefly and gave a small nod, nothing dramatic, only assurance. "I'm not here to touch you," she murmured, still speaking to the dog. "I just need you to breathe." Coda's growl faltered, breaking into a confused huff. His breathing stuttered once, then again, then began to slow, following the cadence of her voice. Madeline adjusted her position by inches, not closer, just clearer within his field of view. She noticed the tremor in his hind leg worsen as he shifted weight, the muscles spasming involuntarily. "He's guarding you," she said quietly to Ethan, not taking her eyes off the dog. "That's all he knows to do right now." Ethan nodded once. "He won't let anyone near his back leg." "I won't go near it," Madeline replied. "Not yet." The first nurse hovered near the desk, her face pale with a mix of fear and relief as the barking subsided. The older nurse watched intently, arms crossed tight against her chest, recognizing competence when she saw it, but unsure whether to support it. Madeline eased one knee toward the floor, careful, deliberate, stopping well short of Coda's reach. She placed her weight evenly, posture relaxed, breathing slow enough that it became contagious. "Good," she said softly. "That's good." Coda held still. His ears shifted again, no longer pinned back, no longer fully erect. He leaned slightly into Ethan's leg, reassured by proximity. Madeline noted the way his ribs expanded unevenly, guarding against pain. "I'm going to help you stay still," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's it. No surprises." She reached out slowly, stopping before contact, letting Coda see the intention before the movement. When he didn't react, she gently rested her fingertips against the floor near his paw, not touching him, simply occupying space. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Dr. Whitman cleared his throat sharply. "Nurse," he said, authority sharpening the word. "You're stepping outside protocol." Madeline didn't look at him. "I'm not treating him," she replied calmly. "I'm stabilizing the situation." The dog's breathing evened further. Madeline shifted her weight again, this time close enough to observe the angle of the leg without contact. She spoke aloud, partly for Ethan, partly for the room. "He's not fractured. If he were, he wouldn't tolerate this position. This looks like a ligament injury. Painful, but not unstable." She finally made contact then, not with the injured leg, but higher up, placing 2 fingers lightly against Coda's chest to feel his breathing. The dog stiffened, then relaxed, trusting her assessment. Madeline adjusted the placement of his leg indirectly, using a folded blanket slid carefully beneath his thigh to support the joint without manipulation. Coda exhaled slowly, a long breath that seemed to drain the last of the room's held tension with it. The security guard lowered his hand from the radio. The first nurse let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Dr. Whitman's expression hardened. "This ends now," he said. "You've crossed a line." Madeline finally looked up at him. Her face was calm, but there was resolve there too, shaped by years of watching people suffer because no one wanted to make the wrong call. "I haven't given medication. I haven't performed a procedure. I've reduced risk." "That determination isn't yours to make," Whitman replied. Ethan shifted slightly, Coda's head lifting in response. "She's helping," he said quietly. "That's irrelevant," Whitman snapped. "Security." The guard hesitated, eyes flicking to the dog, then to Madeline, then back to Whitman. He took a cautious step forward. Coda reacted instantly, muscles tightening, a low warning rolling from his chest. Madeline raised one hand slightly, palm out, not to the guard, but to the dog. "Easy," she said, softer than before. "I'm still here." The warning subsided, replaced by tension held tightly in check. Whitman's jaw clenched. "Enough," he said. "You are suspended, effective immediately. Step away." Madeline didn't argue. She withdrew her hand slowly, deliberately, ensuring Coda remained calm before she shifted her weight back. She stood, brushing her palms against her scrub pants, her movements unhurried. "I understand," she said evenly. She met Ethan's eyes briefly, something unspoken passing between them. Then she took one step back, then another, leaving the space she had created intact. Coda did not move. He stayed where he was, supported, breathing steady, eyes still alert. The room felt altered, as though something essential had been revealed and could not be unseen. Whitman gestured sharply toward the doors. "You need to leave," he told Ethan. "Now." Ethan tightened his grip slightly on the leash. "We will," he said, "when he can." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, the lines had been drawn differently now. Madeline stood near the wall, suspended badge heavy against her chest, watching the dog she had chosen to see. The decision did not come with raised voices or dramatic gestures. It arrived the way policies always did, quiet and absolute, carried on the authority of a man who believed order mattered more than context. Dr. Harold Whitman stood a few paces from the group, his posture rigid, hands clasped behind his back as if he were addressing a boardroom rather than an emergency department caught between risk and consequence. He was 58, tall but narrow, his frame giving the impression of precision rather than strength. His gray hair was parted neatly, his white coat unwrinkled even at the end of a long shift. Whitman had built his career on prevention, on the belief that the worst disasters came not from cruelty, but from small exceptions allowed to grow unchecked. Years earlier, a lawsuit tied to a procedural lapse had nearly shuttered the hospital. The memory of it lived in the tightness of his jaw now. "This situation is over," he said evenly, his voice carrying without effort. "We are not equipped, insured, or authorized to handle animals in this facility." Madeline Brooks stood near the wall where she had stepped back moments earlier, her shoulders squared despite the weight settling into her chest. She looked smaller away from the dog, less anchored, but her expression did not waver. She had learned long ago that protests made people stop listening. Her badge rested heavy against her scrubs, the word nurse catching the light with a sharpness it hadn't carried before. "I understand," she said simply. Whitman turned to her, his gaze direct. "You acted without clearance, without consultation, and in direct opposition to a safety directive. Effective immediately, you are suspended, pending review." The words landed with a dull finality. Suspension, not termination, but the difference felt academic in the moment. Madeline nodded once. There was a flicker in her eyes then, not fear, not anger, but recognition. This was the consequence she had accepted the moment she chose to kneel. A woman stepped forward from near the medication cart, hesitating. Her name was Sarah Caldwell, a charge nurse in her early 40s, tall and lean, her dark hair streaked prematurely with gray from years of night shifts and hard calls. She had the posture of someone who stood between conflict and chaos for a living, shoulders slightly forward, ready to absorb impact. Sarah had once frozen during a pediatric code years back, a hesitation that had cost seconds she never stopped counting. Since then, she had become rigid about procedure, but not unkind. "Dr. Whitman," she began carefully. "She didn't—" Whitman raised a hand without looking at her. "This is not a discussion." Sarah stopped. Her mouth closed. The muscles along her jaw tightened, but she stepped back into place, eyes dropping to the floor. Silence spread, not because everyone agreed, but because no one was willing to own dissent. Whitman shifted his attention to Ethan Cross. "You need to remove the dog from the building immediately," he said. "If weather conditions prevent safe transport, that is unfortunate, but it is not our responsibility." Ethan did not react at first. He stood beside Coda, one hand steady on the leash, the other resting lightly against the dog's shoulder. His expression remained unreadable, but something hardened behind his eyes. He had heard variations of this before, the way responsibility evaporated once it became inconvenient. "He can't walk," Ethan said quietly. Whitman's gaze flicked to the dog, then back to Ethan. "Then you will need to carry him." Coda shifted as if responding to the tension in Ethan's voice, muscles tightening again. His breathing quickened slightly, and his ears pinned back just enough to signal discomfort. Ethan felt it immediately and adjusted his stance, grounding them both. "We will leave," Ethan said after a moment, "when he's stable enough." "That is not a decision you get to make," Whitman replied. A security supervisor entered then, drawn by the quiet gravity of the scene. His name was Mark Ellison, late 40s, broad-shouldered, with the calm demeanor of someone who had spent years de-escalating situations that could turn violent if mishandled. He wore his uniform like a second skin, his eyes moving constantly, taking in posture and distance rather than faces. He paused when he saw Coda, reading the dog's stance accurately. "Doctor," Mark said cautiously, "if we push this too hard, we might make it worse." Whitman turned sharply. "This facility does not negotiate with threats." Coda lifted his head at the word threats, a low sound rumbling in his chest. Ethan tightened his grip on the leash, murmuring something under his breath that no one else heard. The sound subsided, controlled again, but the warning lingered in the air. Madeline watched from her place near the wall, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She could see the slight tremor in Coda's hind leg worsening the way his weight shifted awkwardly. Every instinct she had screamed to step forward again, to adjust the support she had placed, to keep him steady. She did not move. She had done what she could without making things worse. Whitman gestured toward the doors. "Escort them out." Mark hesitated, then nodded, stepping forward slowly, keeping his distance. "Sir," he said to Ethan, Let's take this one step at a time. Ethan met his gaze, reading him the way he read Coda. We're not resisting, he said. We're waiting. Waiting was not defiance. It was patience, sharpened into resistance. Whitman exhaled sharply through his nose. You have 5 minutes, he said. After that, this becomes trespassing. The word hung heavy, absurd and dangerous all at once. Sarah shifted again, her hands curling into fists at her sides. She looked at Madeline, then away, guilt and relief warring in her expression. She did not speak. None of them did. The hallway seemed to narrow, the hum of the building pressing in. Patients in distant rooms slept unaware. Monitors beeped steadily, indifferent to the ethical fracture unfolding feet away. The hospital continued to function because it always did. Madeline unclipped her badge slowly, the plastic catching briefly on the fabric of her scrubs. The sound was soft but unmistakable. She placed it carefully on the counter beside her, aligning it with unnecessary precision. It felt like leaving a part of herself behind, but also like relief. She looked at Ethan then, her gaze steady. He's going to need support under the joint, she said quietly. If you lift him without it, he'll fight the pain. Ethan nodded. I know. She hesitated, then continued. He trusts you? That matters? It does, Ethan replied. Whitman watched the exchange with visible irritation. This is over, he repeated. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the glass doors as if punctuating his words. The storm had not lessened. It did not care about timelines or policies. Ethan bent carefully, testing Coda's weight, gauging his response. Coda tensed, then relaxed slightly when Ethan adjusted his grip, the two of them moving with practiced coordination, born of necessity rather than training manuals. Madeline turned away before she could second-guess herself. She walked toward the staff exit, her footsteps measured, back straight. No one stopped her. No one spoke. Behind her, Ethan prepared to move, aware that every second mattered now. Coda stayed alert, breathing steady, eyes never leaving the room that had decided he did not belong. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, layered with choices made and unmade, settling into the walls where no one would ever officially acknowledge it. When the automatic doors finally slid open again, it was not with resolution, only with the sound of wind rushing in to claim the space left behind. The automatic doors closed behind them with a muted thud, sealing the warmth and light inside, as if the building itself had decided to forget them. Cold rushed in immediately, sharp and biting, wrapping around exposed skin with practiced cruelty. The parking lot was a wide sheet of ice, broken only by tire tracks already filling with snow, the overhead lights flickering faintly through the storm. Ethan moved carefully, every step deliberate, his boots finding traction by instinct more than sight. Coda managed 2 steps before his rear leg buckled completely, the strength draining out of him without warning. He went down hard, a heavy collapse that knocked the breath from his chest and sent a sharp jolt through Ethan's grip on the leash. Ethan was beside him instantly, dropping to one knee on the frozen ground. He did not speak at first. He placed one hand firmly against Coda's shoulder, the other sliding under the dog's chest to keep him from twisting. Coda tried to rise again, muscles spasming in protest, a low sound tearing free from his throat before he could stop it. The sound was not fear. It was frustration, the kind that came from a body that refused to obey orders it had followed for years. "Stay," Ethan said quietly. Coda obeyed, though his breathing came faster now, each inhale shallow, each exhale trembling. His ears flattened briefly, then lifted again, scanning the dark shapes beyond the lights, the mountain invisible but present in the way the wind moved. Pain pulsed through his leg in waves, stronger now that adrenaline had burned away. Madeline hesitated just inside the doorway before pushing it open again. The cold hit her instantly, stealing her breath, but she stepped out anyway, scrubs offering little protection against the storm. She was no longer a nurse on duty, no longer shielded by policy or role. She was simply a woman watching something she cared about unravel in front of her. She crouched a few feet away, keeping distance, her posture low and non-threatening. "He's worse," she said softly, stating what they both already knew. Ethan nodded once. "The cold isn't helping." Coda shifted again, trying to reposition his leg, failing. His nails scraped weakly against the ice, the sound thin and desperate. Madeline watched his breathing hitch, the way his eyes darted briefly to Ethan's face before settling again, searching for reassurance. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, fingers stiff with cold. He pulled out a small, battered device no larger than a deck of cards, its casing scratched and dulled by years of use. It did not look official. It looked forgotten. He thumbed a recessed switch, holding it steady until a faint vibration pulsed against his palm. Madeline's eyes flicked to the device. "What is that?" "A locator," Ethan replied. "For him." He clipped it carefully to Coda's harness, the movement practiced, reverent. "It pings a system that's not supposed to exist anymore." Coda didn't resist the touch. He barely reacted at all, focused entirely on staying conscious through the pain now burning up his spine. Madeline swallowed. "Will it work?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. His gaze lifted briefly toward the dark slope beyond the parking lot, as if measuring distance the way he always had. "It always has," he said finally. They waited. The wind howled louder, pushing snow across the ice in thick sheets. Somewhere inside the hospital, a door opened and closed, muffled voices drifting out and then disappearing again. No one came to check on them. No one looked out. Coda's breathing grew uneven, his chest rising too quickly now, his tongue lolling briefly before he pulled it back in, disciplined even in distress. Ethan slid his arm further beneath the dog's body, lifting just enough to take pressure off the injured joint. The movement drew a sharp sound from Coda, short and broken, then silence as he forced it back down. "I know," Ethan murmured, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I know." Madeline watched his hands, the way they moved without hesitation, precise and confident. She had seen family members hold dying patients like this before, not frantic, not pleading, just present. It was different here, but not by much. After a long moment, Ethan spoke again, not looking at her. "He pulled 3 men out of a slide zone." Madeline blinked. "What?" "3," he repeated. 2 were already unconscious. 1 was buried up to his chest. Visibility was nothing. Sound carried wrong. He found them anyway. His voice remained even, but something tightened beneath it, old and unresolved. "It was a search operation," he continued. "Avalanche aftershock. Command called it off. Too unstable." Madeline's brow furrowed. "But you went back." "I did," Ethan said. "He did." Coda's ear twitched at the sound of Ethan's voice, his eyes lifting briefly before closing again. "He dragged the first one clear," Ethan said. "Then the second. Took longer. Snow was setting fast. I told him to stay with me." Ethan's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping once. "He didn't." Madeline didn't interrupt. "He went back for the third," Ethan continued. "That's when the ridge gave way. I went down hard. Lost my footing." Ethan adjusted his grip as Coda shuddered, the memory playing out silently behind his eyes. "I remember thinking the mountain had finally decided." Madeline's breath fogged in front of her face. She could see it now, the whiteout, the noise swallowed whole by snow. "He came back for me," Ethan said. "Pulled me out by my pack strap. Wouldn't let go." Madeline glanced at Coda's leg, understanding settling into her chest like weight. "That's when he was hurt." Ethan nodded. "But the report said equipment failure. Weather complication. Dog sustained minor strain. He gave a short, humorless exhale. They erased the rest. Coda shifted again, his breathing hitching sharply. His body sagged further, exhaustion finally overtaking discipline. Ethan felt it immediately. "Stay with me," he said, firmer now. Madeline leaned forward slightly, careful not to cross the space. "His breathing's too fast," she said. "He's burning energy he doesn't have." "I know," Ethan replied. She hesitated, then spoke again. "You don't have to carry this alone." Ethan finally looked at her. The look was brief, assessing, then something softer edged through it. "He's the last one," he said. Madeline understood, not intellectually, viscerally. They waited again. Time stretched, distorted by cold and fear and the steady, relentless howl of wind. Madeline's fingers began to numb. Ethan barely noticed. His focus was locked entirely on the weight beneath his arm, the rise and fall he counted automatically. Then Coda's breathing stuttered. His chest seized, a sharp, panicked gasp tearing through him. His body went rigid, then slack, the strength bleeding out all at once. Ethan tightened his hold, pulling him closer, his heart slamming hard against his ribs. "Coda," he said sharply. Madeline's breath caught. She shifted closer without thinking, stopping herself just in time. "Ethan," she said, urgency threading her voice. "I know," Ethan said. He pressed his forehead briefly against the dog's, grounding them both. "Hold on." The device on Coda's harness vibrated again, stronger this time, a low, steady pulse. Ethan felt it through his glove. He looked up, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the lights. "Someone's listening," he said. Coda's eyes fluttered open slightly, meeting Ethan's gaze for a brief second. His tail twitched once against the ice, weak but deliberate. The mountain did not answer. But something else had. The vibration in the device steadied into a rhythm that felt deliberate, almost patient. Ethan did not relax, but something in his posture shifted, the way it always had when a long wait finally acquired shape. He tightened his arm under Coda's chest as the dog's breathing hitched again, then settled into a shallow, fragile cadence. Madeline stayed where she was, close enough to matter, far enough not to threaten, her hands clenched together to keep from shaking. The first headlights appeared without warning, cresting the far edge of the lot and cutting through the snow with unnatural precision. They did not strobe. They did not announce themselves. Two dark vehicles moved in controlled formation, tires gripping ice without drama, engines low and restrained. They stopped well short of the hospital entrance, angled slightly outward, as if guarding an invisible perimeter. Ethan exhaled slowly. "They came quiet," he said. Madeline's eyes followed the movement as doors opened in unison. The men who stepped out were not large, not theatrical, but there was something unmistakable in the way they moved. Their uniforms were unmarked except for subdued insignia, their posture disciplined but unforced. One of them broke from the group and walked forward alone. Colonel Samuel Rourke was in his late 50s, tall and narrow, his frame carried upright by habit rather than strength. His hair was iron gray, cut short and precise, his face lined deeply around the eyes and mouth, lines formed less by age than by decisions made without consensus. His eyes were pale, sharp, and unblinking, taking in Ethan, Madeline, and the dog on the ice in a single sweep. He wore a long, dark coat over his uniform, the fabric dusted with snow, as if he had walked through it without noticing. He stopped a few feet away and removed his gloves. "Ethan Cross," he said, voice calm, carrying easily through the wind. Ethan nodded once. "Colonel." Rourke's gaze dropped to Coda. It lingered there, something unreadable passing through his expression before it hardened into control. "Status." "Rear leg injury," Ethan replied. "Shock setting in. He's holding, but not for long." Rourke crouched slightly, careful with the movement. He did not reach out. He did not speak to the dog. He simply observed. "He's still on active registry," he said quietly. That device confirmed it. Madeline swallowed. "You knew he was here." Rourke looked at her then, really looked. She felt the weight of it immediately. "I knew he might be," he said. "I did not know the condition." "And now?" she asked. "Now," Rourke replied, straightening, "the hospital becomes obligated." Another vehicle rolled in behind the first, stopping closer to the entrance. A man stepped out carrying a hard case, his face young, his movements efficient. He nodded once at Rourke, then at Ethan, eyes flicking briefly to Coda with something like reverence. Rourke turned back to Ethan. "He is not retired," he said. "He was never officially released from service." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You know that's not what the paperwork says?" Rourke's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "The paperwork says what it was ordered to say." Madeline felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Ordered by who?" Rourke met her gaze again. "By people who believed a strategic failure could be buried if the right pieces stayed silent." Ethan did not look surprised. He adjusted his grip as Coda shifted weakly, the dog's head dropping against his forearm. "You silenced me," Ethan said evenly. "I contained you," Rourke corrected. "There is a difference." "There wasn't to me." Rourke did not argue. He glanced toward the hospital doors, where a small cluster of staff now hovered just inside, their faces pale and uncertain. "You were ordered to sign a non-disclosure after the avalanche operation," he said. "The official narrative protected command. It did not protect you. Or him." Madeline shook her head. "So you let him walk away with a wounded partner and no support." "I allowed him to leave with what he asked for," Rourke said. Silence. Ethan's eyes finally hardened. "That wasn't protection." "No," Rourke said. "It was avoidance. And it was wrong." The young man with the case knelt a short distance away and opened it. Inside were medical supplies more advanced than anything Madeline had seen in the emergency bay. He worked quickly, efficiently, but did not approach yet, waiting for instruction. Rourke raised his voice slightly, just enough to carry. "Under provisional military protocol," he said, "this facility is now required to receive and stabilize an active-duty military working dog." A murmur rippled through the staff inside. Someone stepped forward, a woman in administrative scrubs, her posture rigid with authority and fear. She opened the door halfway but did not come out. "Colonel, this is a civilian hospital," she said. "We have procedures." Rourke turned toward her. His tone did not change. "You now have additional ones." She hesitated. "We were told the animal was a safety risk." Rourke's gaze flicked back to Coda, then returned to her. "That animal has pulled more people out of danger than this building has beds," he said. "He will not bite your staff. He will not resist care if approached correctly." Madeline felt her throat tighten. She glanced at Ethan, then back at Rourke. "I tried to tell them," she said quietly. Rourke inclined his head a fraction. "You did more than tell them." Inside, the director of the hospital appeared at the edge of the crowd, face tight with restrained fury. He did not step forward. He did not speak. The silence around him felt heavier than protest. Rourke turned back to Ethan. "You were ordered to forget," he said. "I was ordered to make sure you did." Ethan's grip tightened briefly. "And now?" "And now," Rourke said, "the mistake has resurfaced." The wind shifted, driving snow harder against the vehicles. Coda stirred again, his breathing ragged, his body trembling with effort. Ethan leaned closer instinctively. Rourke nodded once. "Bring him inside," he said. The young man moved forward then, calm and focused. He introduced himself briefly as a medic, his voice steady, his movements careful as he approached Coda from the side, letting the dog see him. Coda's eyes opened, tracking him weakly, but he did not growl. He did not pull away. Madeline exhaled shakily. "He trusts him," she whispered. "He trusts the uniform," Rourke said, "and the man inside it." Together they lifted Coda onto a stretcher brought from the vehicle, the movement slow and synchronized. Coda let out a soft sound, then settled, his head turning just enough to find Ethan's hand. Ethan kept it there, fingers brushing fur worn thin in places by years of harness and weather. As they moved toward the doors, the hospital staff parted without being told. No one spoke, no one objected. Rourke paused beside Ethan at the threshold. "This does not erase what happened," he said quietly, "but it acknowledges it." Ethan met his gaze. "I'm not here for acknowledgement." Rourke nodded. "I know." The doors slid open, warm light spilling out again, swallowing the snow, the silence, the unspoken weight of years deferred. Coda disappeared inside first, carried carefully, the mountain left behind for now. The operating corridor swallowed Coda in stages, each set of doors closing with a quieter sound than the last. The stretcher rolled smoothly now, guided by hands that moved with practiced economy. Overhead, lights slid past in a steady rhythm, reflected faintly in the dog's dark eyes. He was calmer inside, the cold replaced by a neutral brightness and a low hum of machines. Ethan walked alongside without speaking, his hand never leaving the place at the dog's shoulder where the fur thinned from years of harness wear. He counted breaths without meaning to. He always did. The surgical team assembled with little ceremony. There was no audience, no argument. Orders had been given and accepted, and the room shifted into a different register of purpose. A veterinarian surgeon joined them, a woman in her late 40s with short auburn hair and a posture that suggested confidence earned rather than asserted. Her name was Dr. Elaine Porter, compact and steady, with eyes that did not rush to conclusions. She examined Coda with a brief, precise touch, reading his body the way some people read maps. "Ligament involvement," she said evenly. "Severe strain with possible tear. Manageable if we act now." Ethan nodded. "Do what you have to." "We will," she replied, already turning to prep. "He's strong. He's been compensating. That's bought him time." The medic stepped back, and Ethan felt the subtle shift when it became clear his presence was no longer required inside the room. He paused at the threshold as anesthesia was administered, waiting until Coda's breathing deepened and the tension finally left his frame. Only then did he step away, the doors sealing behind him, leaving the hum of surgery and the quiet ache of not being able to do more. In the waiting area, the hospital resumed its careful choreography, though something fundamental had changed. Staff moved with a different awareness now, glances lingering longer, voices lower. Colonel Rourke stood near the wall, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. He looked older under the fluorescent lights, the lines at his mouth deeper, his shoulders carrying the weight of decisions that had outlived their justifications. Madeline watched from a few steps away, arms wrapped loosely around herself to keep warm in a room that was not cold. She had not put her badge back on. It lay in her pocket, forgotten and heavy. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night ebbed, replaced by a slower reckoning. With Coda in surgery, there was nothing left to do but wait, and waiting had always been dangerous for her thoughts. She glanced at the clock, then at her phone, then away again. She had silenced it earlier out of habit, a reflex learned over years of trying not to split herself between patients and family. She turned it back on now. Messages stacked quickly, the most recent marked urgent. She read it once, then again, the words rearranging themselves into something she had been trying not to say aloud. Noah Brooks was 16 and had been sick longer than he remembered being well. He was tall for his age but too thin, his shoulders narrow, his chest working harder than it should for each breath. His hair was dark and perpetually unruly, his smile quick to appear and quicker to fade when exertion stole his air. He had learned early how to ration energy, how to sit quietly when others moved, how to joke about things he did not want to explain. Years ago, a winter respiratory infection had revealed the deeper truth, a chronic lung condition that required specialized treatment. The doctors had agreed on the diagnosis, on the plan, on the prognosis. What they had not agreed on was how to pay for it. Madeline had learned to navigate that space between approval and access with practiced efficiency. She filled out forms, made calls, waited on hold, followed protocols that promised eventual solutions. Noah met every clinical criterion. He always had. What he did not have was the funding to move him where he needed to go. She felt the familiar tightness in her chest as she read the update from the clinic. Noah's oxygen levels had dipped again. Nothing catastrophic yet. Nothing that triggered alarms. Just enough to remind her that time was not a neutral factor. Rourke noticed her stillness and turned slightly. "You're carrying something else," he said, not a question. She hesitated, then nodded. "My brother," she said quietly. "He needs care we can't get here." Rourke studied her for a moment, not with suspicion, but with recognition. "He's been evaluated?" "Yes," Madeline replied. "More than once?" "And approved." "Yes." "Blocked by funding." She exhaled. "And transfer logistics." Rourke's gaze drifted briefly toward the closed operating doors, then back to her. "You didn't mention this earlier." "I wasn't asking," she said. He nodded. "You weren't. That's the problem." A staff member passed by, a young orderly with tired eyes and a too-large jacket pushing a cart of supplies. He slowed instinctively near the colonel, then hurried on, uncertain. The hospital moved around them, busy and contained, unaware of how close it had come to a different outcome hours earlier. Rourke motioned toward an empty consultation room. "Walk with me." Inside, the room was bare, a small table, 2 chairs, a sink. Rourke closed the door without ceremony. He removed his gloves and set them down carefully. "There is a fund," he said. "It exists for situations that fall between categories." Madeline frowned. "I don't want to take resources from—" "You wouldn't be," Rourke interrupted gently. "This isn't a competition. It's an alignment." He explained without embellishment. The fund supported veterans and their immediate families when civilian systems stalled. It did not override medical priorities. It did not move anyone ahead of another patient. It removed obstacles that had nothing to do with medicine, transport, authorization, interim coverage, the kinds of barriers that pretended to be neutral. Madeline listened, her hands tightening on the edge of the chair. "He qualifies," she said softly. "He does," Rourke replied. "He has for some time." "And this wouldn't affect anyone else?" "No," he said. "It would only affect him." She closed her eyes briefly, the weight of it pressing down all at once. "Why now?" Rourke did not look away. "Because tonight reminded me what avoidance costs," he said. "And because you did what you were not ordered to do." A knock interrupted them. A nurse stepped in, older, her hair pinned neatly back, her posture composed. It was Sarah Caldwell. She looked at Madeline, then at Rourke. "The surgeon is ready to update you," she said to Rourke. Her voice held a careful neutrality, but her eyes softened briefly when they met Madeline's. Rourke nodded and stood. "We'll finalize this," he said to Madeline. "I'll have my office coordinate with the clinic." Madeline swallowed. "Thank you." He paused at the door. "You didn't ask," he said. "That matters." In the hallway, Ethan stood alone near the windows, his reflection layered over the dark glass. He looked up as Rourke approached. "How is he?" "Stable," Rourke said. "They're repairing what can be repaired." Ethan nodded, absorbing the words without visible reaction. He glanced toward Madeline as she stepped out of the room. "You okay?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I will be." They stood together then, 3 people waiting on outcomes that would not be hurried by presence or will. Inside the operating room, Coda lay under bright lights, surrounded by hands that knew their work. Across town, Noah sat in a clinic room, breathing measured and shallow, unaware that something long stalled had begun to move. Time passed without spectacle. When Dr. Porter finally emerged, her mask lowered, her expression tired but satisfied. Ethan straightened immediately. "He's through the critical portion," she said. "He's strong. Recovery will be work, but it's possible." Ethan let out a breath he had been holding since the parking lot. "Thank you." Madeline felt her phone vibrate. She looked down, then back up, eyes bright with something that bordered on disbelief. "They're transferring him," she said quietly. "They found a bed." Rourke nodded once. 2 lives, he said. Both waiting. Both moving now. Recovery did not announce itself with certainty. It arrived in increments, measured in small permissions the body granted back to itself. When Coda opened his eyes, the room was quiet, the lights dimmed to a careful glow. His breathing was slower now, deeper, the sharp edge of pain dulled into something manageable. Tubes and monitors framed him without crowding, each line placed with intention. His head turned slightly, searching, instinct intact even through anesthesia's haze. Ethan was there before the motion finished. He stood close enough that Coda could smell him, close enough that the dog's eyes settled and stayed. Ethan had not slept. He had learned long ago that waiting did not reward rest. He rested his hand where the fur was thinnest, just behind the shoulder, feeling the steadier rhythm beneath his palm. The dog's tail twitched once, a small signal, deliberate. Dr. Elaine Porter entered quietly, her steps light, her posture relaxed in the way surgeons became only after the work was done. She looked tired, but there was satisfaction in the set of her shoulders. "He's through it," she said. "Repair held. No complications. The next few days will be about restraint." Ethan nodded. "He'll listen." Porter smiled faintly. "They always do," she said, meaning more than one thing. She adjusted a chart, checked a monitor, then stepped back. "He's strong." That helped. When she left, the room seemed to exhale. Coda's eyes drifted closed again, not from exhaustion this time, but from safety. Ethan remained unmoving, as if the simple act of staying could anchor the moment in place. Down the corridor, the hospital moved differently now. The sharp urgency had softened into purpose. Conversations were quieter. Steps were measured. The night shift had given way to morning staff, faces fresh and curious, glances drawn toward the guarded room without fully understanding why. Madeline stood near a window at the end of the hall, phone pressed to her ear, her voice low. The call was brief. It did not need to be long. She listened more than she spoke, nodding as if the person on the other end could see her. When she hung up, her shoulders lowered for the first time since the storm began. Noah had been transferred before dawn. The transport team moved quickly, efficiently, the kind of motion that came from repetition rather than alarm. Madeline had watched them wheel him out, oxygen steady, eyes alert. He had smiled at her, small and crooked, the way he did when he wanted to pretend everything was fine. She had leaned close, careful not to tire him. "I'll come when I can," she had said. "You always do," he replied, breath shallow but certain. The call confirmed what she had already felt. He was stable. The worst stretch had passed. The rest would take time, but time was finally on their side. Colonel Rourke stood nearby, speaking quietly with a hospital administrator whose posture suggested caution rather than defiance. The suspension notice that had been drafted hours earlier sat unresolved, its authority dulled by events it could not account for. Rourke did not press the issue. He did not need to. He knew how institutions preserve themselves, and when they chose to wait. Sarah Caldwell watched from the nurse's station, her hands folded tightly around a paper cup gone cold. She looked smaller than she had the night before, the rigid certainty she wore like armor, loosened by what she had seen. She caught Madeline's eye and hesitated, then crossed the hall. "You okay?" Sarah asked quietly. Madeline nodded. "He's going to be." Sarah exhaled, a sound that carried something like relief. "I should have said something earlier," she said. "I didn't." Madeline shook her head. "You didn't have to." Sarah looked away. "That's what I keep telling myself," she said. "Doesn't make it easier." They stood together in silence, not awkward, just honest. When Sarah finally returned to her station, she moved differently, less rigid, as if the night had shifted something she had been bracing for years. Rourke approached Madeline as Ethan stepped out of Coda's room, closing the door gently behind him. "They've frozen the suspension," Rourke said. "Administrative review pending. No timeline." Madeline listened without reacting. "I won't be going back," she said after a moment. Rourke studied her face, measuring resolve rather than impulse. "You don't have to decide today." "I already did," she replied. "I don't fit there anymore." Ethan watched her carefully. "You'd be good anywhere," he said. She smiled faintly. "Anywhere that doesn't confuse caution with care." Rourke nodded once. "There are programs," he said, "clinics that operate closer to the edge. They need people who can make decisions without permission." "I know," Madeline said. "I've been looking." He did not ask where. He understood enough not to. Inside the recovery room, Coda stirred again. Ethan returned immediately, the movement reflexive. The dog's eyes opened, clearer this time, focus sharpening as awareness returned. He shifted slightly, testing boundaries, then stilled when Ethan's hand pressed gently against his shoulder. "Not yet," Ethan murmured. Coda accepted that, his breathing steady, the tension gone. He was not healed, he was beginning. Later, as the morning light pushed through the windows, a young orderly named Caleb entered to check vitals. He was 22, thin and earnest, his hair perpetually falling into his eyes, no matter how often he pushed it back. He moved carefully, speaking softly, his respect obvious in the way he waited for Ethan's nod before approaching. "He's a good one," Caleb said quietly, not as flattery but as observation. Ethan nodded. "He knows his job." Caleb smiled, then moved on, carrying the moment with him. The administrator returned briefly, formal words ready and unused. "We'll be in touch," she said to Madeline, eyes flicking toward Rourke before settling back. Madeline acknowledged her with a nod that carried neither bitterness nor hope. By midday, the hospital had found its rhythm again. Coda slept. Ethan sat. Madeline gathered her things from a locker she no longer considered hers. She folded her scrubs carefully, an old habit, then left the badge behind. It did not feel like loss. It felt like alignment. At the exit she paused. The storm had passed. Snow lay clean and still, the mountain quiet in the distance. She turned back once, catching Ethan's eye through the glass. He lifted a hand slightly, acknowledgment without farewell. The weight did not lift all at once. It eased, gradually, as burdens found their proper owners. Coda healed because he was allowed to. Noah recovered because a door finally opened. Madeline stepped away because she chose to. And Ethan remained where he always had been, beside the one who had never left him. Morning arrived without urgency. The storm had spent itself, leaving Cedar Ridge quiet in a way that felt earned rather than empty. Sunlight slid across the town in pale bands, catching on rooftops and bare branches, revealing what the night had hidden without judgment. Snow thinned along the roads and pulled back from the sidewalks, retreating into uneven banks as if acknowledging that its work was done. Ethan stood outside the hospital with his jacket zipped halfway, the familiar weight of it resting across his shoulders. He watched Coda take his first steps in open air since surgery, slow and deliberate, each movement careful but confident. The dog's gait was uneven, but it held, supported by discipline and patience rather than force. His ears were upright again, alert to sound and scent, his eyes clear. The bandage along his rear leg was clean and secure, the restraint more mental now than physical. Ethan moved with him, not guiding, not correcting, simply present. He had learned that recovery was not something you pushed. It was something you respected. Coda paused, testing balance, then took another step. His tail lifted slightly, not wagging, just steady, a quiet declaration of intent. A small group stood nearby, keeping distance without being told. A nurse watched from the entrance, arms folded loosely, her expression softer than it had been days ago. A maintenance worker leaned against a railing, coffee cooling in his hands as he observed the unlikely sight of a soldier and a dog reclaiming ordinary motion. No one spoke. There was nothing to add. Colonel Rourke appeared briefly, coat buttoned, posture relaxed for the first time since his arrival. He stopped a few paces away, nodding once at Ethan, then at Coda. "You're staying," he said, not as a question. "For now," Ethan replied. Rourke inclined his head. The county approved the training site. Ethan acknowledged it with a brief nod. The avalanche corridors outside town had always been unforgiving. They would be less so now. Coda would not be the last dog to need a handler who understood what mountains remembered and what they took. Rourke did not linger. He understood endings well enough to know when they had already happened. Inside, Madeline moved through the hallway one final time, not as staff, not as visitor, but as someone closing a door properly. She carried a small bag slung over her shoulder, practical and light. Her hair was pulled back the same way it always had been, but her posture was different, less braced, more her own. She stopped briefly at the nurse's station, exchanging quiet words with Sarah Caldwell, whose stance had softened overnight, the rigid lines around her eyes easing as if permission had been granted to breathe again. "You'll be good at this," Sarah said, not referring to a job so much as a direction. Madeline smiled, small and sincere. "So will you." They did not exchange promises. They did not need to. Some changes were not meant to be witnessed by the people they began with. Madeline stepped outside as Ethan and Coda reached the end of the walk. She paused, taking in the scene as if imprinting it. Coda noticed her immediately, his head turning, ears flicking toward her voice before she spoke. She approached slowly, keeping space, respecting the work still being done by muscle and tendon and time. "You look better," she said to the dog. Coda studied her, then leaned slightly toward Ethan's leg, the choice deliberate. Madeline laughed quietly, unoffended. "Fair enough," she said. Ethan met her gaze. "You heading out?" "Yes," she replied. "I start with the community program tomorrow." He nodded. "They'll be lucky." She hesitated, then added, "So will the people who need them." They stood together for a moment, the silence comfortable. The hospital behind them felt smaller now, not diminished, just defined. It had done what it could and what it could not. That was enough. Madeline turned toward the parking lot, then stopped. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, checking it once more. A message waited, brief and steady. Noah's oxygen levels had stabilized overnight. He was asking when she would visit. She typed a reply with gloved fingers, smiling as she sent it. Ethan watched Coda take another careful step. "He'll walk patrol again," he said, not to convince himself, but to mark a truth. Madeline nodded. "He already is." She walked away without looking back, not because she couldn't, but because she didn't need to. Later, beyond the edge of town, Ethan stood with a small group of volunteers near a marked training corridor. They were not soldiers, not all of them. A forest ranger with a weathered face and steady hands. A ski patroller with a limp earned years earlier and worn without complaint. Two younger handlers, eager and uncertain, their dogs restless but attentive. Ethan spoke little, demonstrating more than explaining, letting Coda move ahead just enough to show what patience looked like when it worked. Coda paused at a slope, sniffed, then moved forward with intention. The others watched closely, learning not from instruction, but from example. By afternoon, the mountain was quiet again. Tracks crossed and faded. The work continued without spectacle. As the sun lowered, Ethan and Coda returned to town. They passed the hospital once more, not as guests, not as problems to be solved, but as people moving on. Coda stopped briefly, turning his head toward the building, then away. The chapter was closed. No sirens cut the air. No announcements followed. Life resumed with the subtlety it preferred. That night, as lights came on across Cedar Ridge, the quiet settled fully. Not the silence of absence, but the calm of something held together long enough to endure. Lives moved forward along paths adjusted by small decisions made at the right moment. Coda lay at Ethan's feet, breathing even, the mountain outside their window no longer calling for proof. Madeline drove east, the road clear, her thoughts steady. Somewhere else, Noah slept without effort, his chest rising without struggle. Nothing dramatic marked the end, no ceremony, no final word, just morning without snow and the simple grace of what remained. At the end of this story, there is no loud victory, no headline, no celebration. There is only a quiet truth that feels older than rules and stronger than fear. Sometimes what saves a life is not authority or permission, but the courage to see what others choose to overlook. In moments like that, help arrives not as thunder, but as grace. Many people call it coincidence when the right person steps forward at the right time. Others call it timing. But for those who have lived through nights like this, it feels closer to a miracle. A gentle reminder that God still works through ordinary hands, steady voices, and hearts willing to act when silence would be easier. Faith does not always ask us to move mountains. Sometimes it asks us to kneel, to wait, or to refuse to turn away. In everyday life, we are given the same choice more often than we realize: to follow the safest rule or to follow compassion, to stay quiet or to speak when it matters, to walk past pain or to stop and see it. You may not wear a uniform or stand in a hospital hallway, but someone near you is waiting for kindness that feels impossible to ask for. If this story touched you, do not let it end here. Share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with Amen if you believe that God still shows up in quiet moments. Subscribe to the channel so these stories can continue reaching hearts that need them. And may God bless you, protect your loved ones, and guide you to be the miracle someone else is praying for.